last time we were together, we looked at that passage in Matthew chapter 14 where Peter walks on the water toward Jesus. And we left you with the idea that what formula or what pattern do we operate in our lives? I suggested that as Peter stepped into the boat to go onto the Sea of Galilee, he had a pattern in place, and it was sea, storm, boat. But when he met Jesus out in the middle of the Sea of Galilee, in the middle of that storm, it changed for an instant to sea, storm, Jesus. And we left you with the question, life, struggle, problem, what fits in there? We also talked about, and we called it a flight, that anxiety was a flight from desire. And we talked about how when we came to the question mark, it was about control, trying to control when everything was out of control, and the areas we moved to say, well, I can control this, and how we were energized to control certain things in life, particularly our relationship. So
this week, this particular session, we want to talk about what awakens desire. Because I don't want to get rid of the longing of what I deeply long for. I want to get rid of the control. But what do I do with the longing? And so...
Well, that's pretty risky stuff.
It is. And I believe that my journey in this area kind of started when we had some particularly bruising interactions, and pretty much our relationship was on the rocks. And I made an internal decision that to need hurts, so I will never need anyone again, especially you. The trouble with that was I really killed off my desire, and I became quite cold and hard.
So the decision actually removed desire.
It removed it, And then I realised that I was actually bereft, because it was almost like, well, now I've given up any chance of getting what I need in this life. So where does that leave me? So I started to turn to God, and I remember having a conversation with him saying, well, if you don't come through for me in this area, I may as well just pack up and go home. And I kind of began opening my heart or thawing that coldness, and it began with him. I had to resign as keeper of the universe. And I had to...
That's a big job.
Absolutely. And I do remember coming to you and asking your forgiveness for setting you up to be God in my life, or to take that place that only God could fill. I wanted you to fill me up.
and I remember that conversation. I can remember the sense of relief I had. I didn't realise that I was carrying that burden until you named it.
Yeah, so I asked God what it would look like, because, he says that he comes to give life and give it abundantly. And I was not in that abundant place. I was very far from it. And as I said, feeling quite bereft. But as I kind of thought and began to open my heart to him, things began to change. And I'll come back to that in a minute, but I'd like to ask you, what began to awaken your desire?
Yes, I guess in order to understand what that is, I have to describe how I was before that began to awaken. And I'd got myself into a position where I was furiously trying to control the things that I thought I could control, like at work, never making a mistake, so that I could not get punished for a mistake, which was an incredibly heavy burden to carry, but I still thought I could pull it off. And so always being right, a real movement towards perfectionism. And
that came into this relationship and into our family as well, because you had very high standards for yourself, but you had very high standards for us too that we couldn't ever meet.
Yeah, it was as if the values sat over all of us and we all had to bow down to them because that was the way I was going to survive, by maintaining these values and standards. And so it was a really not an enjoyable place. It didn't give me life. In actual fact, it sucked life out of me.
Yes.
And all of that passion that I had in my earlier years, it was as if it was just something was poured all over it that just disappeared. And so I became quite cynical. You would have recognised it, but other people out in the marketplace and even friends would not have recognised it. But I felt the cynicism.
Well, to me, you can tell me if this is true, but to me it was more than cynicism. There was an anger, especially an anger at God, that you haven't come through for me in the way that I demand.
Yeah.
And the reason I can say that about you is because I recognise that in me as well.
Yeah, because we had ongoing struggles and they were manifesting themselves not only in our relationship but with the kids as well. And they were painful. And so it looked as if, well, life is a mess. And I tried to do my very best and this is the result.
Yes.
So you're to blame. And so I became cynical in my faith. It became more of a performance, a function that I did.
But I know that in you desire is awakened. In other words, those things that you deeply long for, you've allowed to come up. So what's been that journey and how have you dealt with those longings?
God used some powerful incidences in my life, and it wasn't just a one-time event, but they were quite significant and powerful. And it was like the crust around my heart, I'd have an incident and a part of that crust would be just blasted apart. And it was as if the grace and love of God was able to get through and begin to soften the inside. And there, initially, it was a passion that began to stir. You know, all of that enthusiasm and delight that I had in our earlier years and wanting to change the world and do mighty things for God, there was a semblance of that came back into my life. And his lovely favour on what we were doing in ministry. And I saw the Holy Spirit impact people. And it was like, oh, what's going on here? And so what I believe happened in my life is that I changed my stance toward God.
From what to what?
Instead of being closed and you stay away, you're on the outside of my life, I'll be running it from here on out. I'll be in control. I invited it. It was more invitational. It was more exploratory. Okay, I can see what you're doing and I like it. I invite you more. Show me more. I want to explore this relationship.
Yeah, it's really hard to define the process when you come to put words around it, because there's a part that only God does in the healing of the heart and the turning around. And of course, the process is different for everybody. But when I try to think about what happened for me, I come back to forgiveness.
Forgiveness of whom?
Well, maybe there's a step before that. There was a renouncing or a repentance of my control, that I had tried to find life everywhere apart from God. I tried to find it in you. I tried to find it in the kids. So I needed to ask God's forgiveness for that. So that was part of the forgiveness. And then I had to forgive myself for the damage that I had done to you and the kids. And the damage I had done to myself with that was quite profound. And then there was a forgiveness of you for the genuine abandonment in our early years, which was different from my longings. I no longer killed off my longings. I longed for that connection from you. I longed for that relationship with God, but I repented of the demand that you fill me up. And that was big, and that was really big. And I forgave you for the genuine times when you had abandoned me, and was able to see, well, you've got your stuff to deal with, and I have to let you do that. That was very freeing, and brought me into an intimate place where I was actually able to offer myself to you, to be known. And to actually have a genuine desire to want to know you.
Well, I find that fascinating too.
Because?
Well, I'm in my mind as you speak to me like that. I'm just exploring. Well, what did that look like? What did I feel when that movement happened?
And what did you?
I sensed in you that there was a freedom.
A softening, I hope.
A softening, a release. I think I wrote a poem to you once that about the fact that you were behind a palisade, and I sensed that there was a few of the planks in the palisade were knocked down, and even though you were wary and rightfully so. Hesitant in some sense, there was an opening. You can come in here.
Well, I think before I would kind of have this underlying thing, make it safe for me, or you're never going to get in there. You're never going to know me. So I had to actually ask God's forgiveness for that too, and it wasn't relying on you anymore. That I would offer to you my heart.
Yeah, and I can't tell you when the desire was awakened. There were a number of incidents. But when I look at it, and if you ask me, well, how do I know it has been awake? One of the things I would say to you is that when I come to you in vulnerability, there is not a requirement that you make it safe for me. Whereas in the past, there would have been a very strong requirement. You make it safe and then I'll be vulnerable. It's a movement.
Which then made me feel unsafe, and round we go again.
It was a movement from me, not requiring whether you made it safe or not. It was my choice, and it was a rich choice, and I enjoyed making that choice.
So it's like the flight from desire was, I'm going to get my longings met by you. I'm going to get my longings met by other people. That's the flight from desire, because in a sense, what I want may never happen, so I've got to just put that aside. The awakening for me was actually bringing those longings out into the open. I do long for love and connection. I do long to feel worthy. I do long to believe I've got something to offer in this relationship. But I had to stop getting you and everybody else to make that happen. And it was a letting go and a surrender to God, and I believe that was similar for you.
Yeah, that's always an area that I don't know what the words are to express it. I always would like to be authentic and honest when I say that, and it's in some sense the words are easy. Oh, God accepts me as I am. So that's the head, and I knew that all of those years. But in my heart, what did I believe? Could I go life, struggle, problem, God, and believe it in my heart, not just know that was the reality. And so that's why my stance has been open toward God, and the lovely things that he's done there, the incidents that he's brought in there, in overseas mission activities, and in our relationship. The movement towards us both forgiving each other was incredibly freeing for you, but for me it was just like releasing me from a prison in some way. And then to go to God, I can remember spending a weekend in a monastery, I think, just on a retreat, and the purpose of going there was to forgive God.
Sounds like an anomaly.
Yeah.
But,
But I was that was the struggle. I had felt wronged, and that was my image of God. And to invite him into my heart and in those areas of my life where I'd hardened. And the lovely things he used, I can remember my son coming to me, and he was in his 20s, I think, and he said to me, "Dad, what have you done with your pain?"
what a searing question.
Well, I never, ever addressed that. What an amazing journey that was. And so it was like God saying, well, okay, Barry, let's go here. And so again, the softening of things. I can remember going to some prayer counselling, and just as we left the room, the lovely lady just touched me on the shoulder and said, God, unshrivel his heart. And I thought, well, okay. But he did.
And he has, and I've seen it.
And there's been a lovely softening of that crusty cynicism around my heart. And so, I can't point to specific incidences.
It's been a pathway, a journey.
But
that word's been so overused, but it has been a journey, hasn't it?
And it's the little things that I see the evidence of my heart accepting the fact that God values me, that he's chosen me, that I belong to him. And one silly little thing, I haven't shared this with you, when we look at these videos, blogs that we're making, or I hear myself on a sermon, 10 years ago I would have internally retreated and not wanted to hear that.
Self-conscious.
Yeah. But now it's not the same. It's not that I want to gobble them up and watch myself all the time, but there's not that sensitivity or awkwardness with it. It's who I am. It's who God made.
I really like
and
that.
And so they're just the little signs to me that say, oh, your heart's changing. And I love those.
You know what one of the signs is to me is gratitude. Because, I always used to look for and expect the worst to happen. And I had very much a learned helplessness that, nothing's within my control. And cynicism. I think we were both very cynical. God, you could make it happen, but if you don't, where does that leave me? But just being able to see him, just in the beauty of where we live, in the beauty of every day, in the beauty of each other, in the beauty of the face of the stranger when we go overseas to minister, in the face of my granddaughter and the gift of her, just the gratitude that wells up within me. And I'm reminded of Philippians 4, 6-7, and I'm going to read it in the Message because it's beautiful. Don't fret or worry. Instead of worrying, pray. Let petitions and praises shape your worries into prayers, letting God know your concerns. And before you know it, a sense of God's wholeness, everything coming together for good, will come and settle you down. I think some of the translations say peace will come and find you. It's wonderful what happens when Christ displaces worry at the centre of your life. And it won't be long before our little granddaughter, I'll be walking her up the park and sitting watching her play. And the reason that she can play and explore is that I'm there, and she knows that I'm for her. And so if any danger should appear, she can look to me and gauge whether she should come running to me for protection, or that she can safely play. In the same way, I've found that with God, that passage says that he's close, he's near, and it actually does mean near. And the only reason I can love and move into ministry is because he's there. I can run back to him when I'm distressed and everything's out of control, and know that he will embrace me. And that brings tears to my eyes, because that's not always been the case, but I feel a real security in that now. He's my attachment. He's the one that gives me the freedom to go out into my world and make a difference.
What difference does that make in our relationship?
I'm not asking you to be that for me. I'm offering it to you and I'm asking for it, which is very different to a demand.
It is.
And just like I have that union with God, I believe we're living into a union with each other that is not demanding, that is life-giving and life-sustaining, because we've given up trying to find in each other our deepest needs that can only be met in God. Is that similar for you?
Yeah, I just know in my heart that I value you more and I accept you more.
Oh, I feel that. Yeah.
Yeah, there's not the need to control how you are, so it makes me feel good. I am actually delighting in the difference that you are. Yeah.
And ultimately, intimacy means intimacy. And so we're allowing that to permeate our relationship, offering ourselves and wanting to know the other. And it's quite beautiful.
I love the reality that as I explore my relationship with God and I invite him into those places and I appreciate the lovely transformational work he's doing in me, one of the practical outcomes of that is he releases my capacity to love others. And so if you'd have asked me 5 years ago, can you love unconditionally, I would have questioned it. But now, because I understand that I'm his and that he loves me, I have that capacity to love you unconditionally. It's not as hard with our granddaughter. I can love her unconditionally.
Yeah, that's not real hard.
So,
But yeah, it's such a better place. And I'm really enjoying it. And I'm really enjoying that just exploring each other into our latter years. It's quite delightful.
Has taken us a while to get here.
It has, and we've probably got a long way to go, but I like where we are.
So what would you do? Life, struggle, problems, question mark.
I'd have to say it is Jesus.
I love that.